Your folks here?
Yes, I do. I'd like to invite. Okay, good. All right. So, fortunately, this next item is unlikely to cause a revolution, so I'm glad about that. Essentially, I think this next item relates to one of the key messages that Bruce Herbold mentioned earlier this morning. How can we buy time to anticipate and adapt? And that's what this item's all about. Thank you for letting us brief you on a forthcoming project. And the State Lands Commission asked us to manage this project, and it's about to get off the ground. Let me first introduce the State Lands Commission staff and representatives from the stakeholder communities who were really instrumental in helping shape the scope for the study that's been in the scoping phase for many years and finally is getting off the ground. And I asked Chris Brown from the State Lands Commission to sit right next to me. He is a senior scientist with the regulatory marine invasive species program. That's right. And so I think Chris has been with the State Lands Commission now for a little over a year, I understand, right? Almost 2 years. So he's been he came over here from the East Coast and has been in the invasive species world and on ballast water for a long time. So he's got lots of experience. John Burge is next to Chris, is the vice president of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, and therefore obviously very interested in what's going to be required under the under the final standards that eventually will be developed for ballast water. And Mark Holmes is the restoration policy expert at the Bay Institute, an advocacy organization that views the entire Bay Delta ecosystem as a single interdependent watershed, and he has been following and participating in this effort for quite some time as well. So all of them will be available for questions if you have any after my quick overview. So unfortunately, Dr. Andy Cohen, who is the director of the Center for Research on Aquatic Bioinvasions, couldn't be here because of a family emergency. So it's just going to be us. But before I give you a sense of what our planned next steps are for getting the study off the ground and what the rationale behind this is, let me ask Chris to give you a quick overview of the role of the State Lands Commission in ballast water regulation, and then I will jump right in on what relevance it has for the Delta.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for having me today. I'm just going to do a really quick kind of overview to get us to where we are today instead of going way into detail. Essentially, 2003, the Marine Invasive Species Act mandated that the Marine Invasive Species Program under the State Lands Commission come up with performance standards for the discharge of ballast water in California. From 2005 to around 2006, we convened with technical advisory groups, which consisted of scientists, the regulated community, environmental groups, and there was a report that was produced, sent to the California legislature to recommend the performance standards. They accepted it into statute in 2006, and that's sort of the law as it is now, these standards. As part of that, we've been doing technology assessment reports, ballast water treatment technology assessment reports, before the implementation dates. And up to this point, we have found that there are no technologies available that can consistently meet California's performance standards. Because of that, the standards have been delayed now until 2016 for existing vessels and 2018 for newly built vessels. One of the areas that has received less attention than shipboard treatment systems is the use of a shore-based ballast water treatment system. And so we thought that it would be an ideal time to have a study conducted, a feasibility study, looking into the potential use of shoreside treatment systems in California to meet performance standards for discharging. So that's a really quick sort of brought us to where we are now and why we decided to contract out on the study.
One clarifying question. When you say the technology doesn't exist, do you mean cost-effective technology?
There's a lot of companies that have been developing and creating treatment systems that are installed on ships to treat ballast water. So far in data that we've seen, those treatment systems are not able to treat the water to the standards set by California. And so it's not necessarily economical, it's just that the technology's not quite there yet.
So one of the 14 policies in the Delta Plan actually address the invasive species issue, and that it states that the potential for new introductions must be avoided. And as you heard from Bruce Herbold earlier, it's we want to minimize the risks of introductions. We probably can't avoid them entirely, but at least we can anticipate what can be, sort of extend the timeline and adapt and anticipate what might happen if they actually do arrive. And one example that most of you are familiar with that really had huge implications here in the lower estuary and in Sassoon Bay was the accidental introduction of the corbula, the overbite clam that has really changed the food web throughout the lower the Western Delta and Sassoon Bay. That was one of those key examples of why San Francisco, the estuary is considered, really not very susceptible, but here you can see what that susceptibility to exotic species invasions actually produces, a complete change in the food web. So that's why we have that policy in the Delta Plan, and that's why the State Lands Commission asked an independent entity to manage the study, the feasibility study, and then ultimately the State Lands Commission will identify what the next steps ought to be after we come up with it. So the plan is to start to kick this off in February, and hopefully by the end of this year we'll have a report in place that we can then deliver to the State Lands Commission for further deliberation and action on it. So, and as Chris mentioned, so far the shipboard treatment system have been unable to meet the interim performance standards. I believe the California standards are, I think, 3 orders of magnitude lower than the international standards. And so the technology, the existing shipboard technology is just not capable of meeting those standards, hence evaluating whether shore-based treatment might be able to do it.
Is it really practical to have a California standard if ours is so much higher than all the other standards? I mean, what happens if you can't meet the standard, you can't use ports in California?
No, the issue really is that California seems to be a lot more susceptible to exotic species invasions, especially invertebrates that make their way over here by ballast water. So other ports are obviously affected by it too, but I think the reason why the standards were developed here was to have a margin of safety that was really tight. So, and Chris may have some more insights into this, since he's actually the regulator that deals with it.
Are these standards practical? I mean, will the technology become available? Will ship owners install them in their villages?
So I'll just go back and say that the standards were set by an advisory group made up of the regulating scientists, environmental groups. Again, these are the standards that they came up with and then the legislature accepted. As of now, the technology is not there. We can't really look into the future and say whether or not it will get there or not. vessels currently have several ways to comply. They can not discharge ballast water. That's obviously going to be the most protective. But for those vessels that require it, they can utilize shipboard treatment, or if it's a feasible thing and whatever this report shows as a potential, they could use shoreside as well.
Chris, is anybody working on the new technology?
For onboard?
Up to the California standards, yeah.
Yes. We do a technology assessment report every couple of years, and what we do is we review all the data that's coming out from
Are there any
technology
barriers that seem insurmountable? Is there any reason they can't come up with the technology to meet these standards?
Not that I would be able to speak to intelligently. Like, I don't know. They're getting there. It's not quite there yet. A lot of it has to do with how to detect the organisms within the ballast after it's been treated. That's kind of one of the stumbling blocks. But a lot of people are working on it and trying to develop the technology.
Well, I can tell you that's an easy thing to do from diagnostics in humans. The problem is going to be getting rid of those offensive organisms. Okay.
So we're planning to, at key milestones, to report back if the council decides to get progress reports on this. I think our intent is to have external peer review at critical milestones too, to make sure that the methodology that the contractor uses is appropriate, and we'll have a selection committee for picking the right contractor to do the work that actually has some expertise in this arena. So similar to levy risk assessment, it's going to be a very similar process of RFP development and actually refinement, and then selecting a contractor that is capable of fulfilling the intent of it.
I just have to comment. It took several years to gin up support for this legislation in 2003, because it was clear that there was a problem to the Delta. A direct harm to the Delta was being done. And now we're here 11 years later, and essentially you're telling us that no action has been taken on that legislation. There's been efforts to try and achieve equipment that can help meet the standards. That's troubling. Does the State Lands Commission take any responsibility for trying to accelerate this to deal with a known problem?
Maybe I undersold it. I mean, there are. So there's also federal and IMO standards that are in play. California's are stricter on a couple size classes. There's a lot. The technology, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the first report we did in 2009, there was half a dozen systems. This one, there's a few dozen. So the technology's getting there. There's been a lag, definitely, but I think we're seeing really good improvements on what's out there.
Well, can I ask a question? The act was passed in 2003. The Lands Commission was supposed to adopt regulations on January 1st, 2008, but they didn't go into effect until January 1, 2016 for some category of ships and 2018 for other categories. Has a regulation been adopted?
The implementation schedule has changed since.
Well, this is statute. I'm just looking at the statute.
Yeah. So the performance standards are also in regulation, and so.
So they've been adopted.
Yes.
Okay. What year?
In 2007.
2007. Okay. And the delay is because the statute says if technologies to meet the performance standards are determined in a review to be unavailable, the Commission shall include in that review an assessment of why the technologies are unavailable. That's the operative stuff.
Correct, yes. And so the reviews that we've done today.
And you needed a peer review study by us before submitting the report to the legislature, reaching the conclusion that the technology is not available? Did I have that wrong?
No, it's a kind of a separate thing. The feasibility study is just looking at another potential means for vessels to reach the standard.
This is the on-site disposal site?
The shore site,
as
yes.
opposed to on-ship?
Correct. There's been a few studies done on shoreside, but they're usually very localized. There hasn't been anything done on a large level, so there's a pretty significant data gap. And so what we're hoping is that this study will close some of that gap.
In a way, this is an example of active adaptive management. The monitoring results showed that ship-based treatment systems can't meet the standards right now, and the next step was maybe other treatment options ought to be explored to find out if it's feasible to meet it through other means, shore-based treatment. And so that's what this is about. And then, again, there'll be a fork in the road. You know, if it's determined feasible, then obviously, you know, the interim standards might become ultimately permanent standard, or you know, whatever the regular standards. And hopefully by the deadline, we'll be able to find out whether that's feasible.
Yeah. And I should have mentioned, too, that it's not that nothing has been done since 2003. Since 1999, vessels are required to do mid-ocean exchanges of their ballast water before coming into California ports. And that's sort of the law of the land. But research has showed that it's effective, but it's not 100%. And so that's why the push has been moved to performance standards and that. So there are protective measures. There is management taking place now that's helping to reduce the influx.
That's helpful, but we're not quite there. We have others that would like to speak. Please. Introduce yourself, please.
Functioning?
Yeah.
Red
a little
button
closer.
down.
Down.
Try again and see.
Does it light up?
No.
Red
No
button
lights.
down. Hold it
Is it
close
working
to-
now?
Close to you.
Hit the microphone, you'll know if it's working.
Working now?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you.